Sziasztok. Right. I'm feeling curiously emotional, and I don't know why, so I'm shaking, so I'm going to speak into the microphone. I think I'm probably, part of it is I'm very moved by us being here, particularly within the context that David described, because for us from the UK, sorry, I'm getting upset. Right. It's tough. It's tough doing drama and theatre in the UK, and it's tough politically for our children. And I'm a bit nervous because, you see, unlike David, who writes things down, I do it like this, and I can't read my own handwriting. And then I thought, I'm going to do a PowerPoint for the first time on my own, which I did without the help of Kerry. I'm very proud, and then he does that. And that's not a PowerPoint, that's just a complete... You know, like when you're at school, when you sort of spend 3/4 of an hour making a little clay pot, and then you go to the teacher and the kid next to you has built an entire civilization out of clay. That's how I feel. So thank you. So anyway, that's probably why I'm feeling slightly emotional too. I think also the fact that I've been asked to talk about the concept so that you can use them this afternoon is slightly intimidating. But I'll do my best. I just wanted to say, I mean, I called it the need for drama. I didn't do this slide. It's got a lot of colour in it. Mine's a bit more plain. You'll see that in a minute. I called it the need for drama because... What's that? Oh, thank you. It's a good idea. That was a drama event. I'll explain that later. I call it the need for drama because drama really is about what it means to be human. That's what it is, in its absolute essence. And we live in a period where I fully believe that our capacity to be creatively human is being seriously challenged. And so it seems to me that it's through drama specifically, art and the imagination, that we can begin to imagine the real, imagine alternative futures rather than be trapped in the tyranny of the present, and that we can begin to imagine and create ourselves and begin to struggle for a world that we want to live in. And I think really that's at the heart of all of this. Yesterday, Jolt spoke about truth and lies. He said that in every lie there is a grain of truth, which is what makes the lie succeed. And I believe that to be true. And I think it's true because what he's addressing there, within any sense of a lie, are two critical elements which are at the core of this gathering today, and that is ideology and the imagination. Because what ideology does is it captures the imagination, it occupies the mind, and that's how the lie takes hold, because it's connected to a grain of truth. I think David explained that eloquently in his piece before we broke. And Adrian was speaking to it all the time when he was talking about the struggle with the state and the church in Malta. Because that's what we're dealing with. How the mind can be occupied and how we can inculcate a sense of fear of ourselves and each other in this period. I'll tell you a story. I got a tweet. I didn't actually. I got an email. My friend has to copy and paste tweets because I don't know how to use them. But I did open the email. I have got that far. And what she sent me was a film. It was a short film. It's a 1-minute film by the National Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children. It's a national body in the UK. And it was called... it said, the National Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children is concerned at the radicalization of our children. And of course, what they're referring to is the Islamicization of our children and how that they are at risk of becoming terrorists. That's what they That's what they were offering. And so they put this film out. And in the film, it had 4 points for parents to look at. The first was, and I wrote these down, so I'll get it right. Internet usage. What are your children watching? That was the first point. The second point was, watch out for any behavioural changes, such as angry outbursts against family and your parents. The third one was, watch for a sense of isolation, withdrawal from the family. And the fourth one was, are they talking like they normally do? Or does it sound like they're speaking from a script? And I thought, has anyone from the National Society of the Prevention for Cruelty for Children ever had adolescent children? Because if that was the case, I would have had to report my children to the authorities for about the last 15 years. But what they're doing is they are picking on a fear, and they are actually trying to occupy our imagination, and they are driving an ideological agenda, which of course has a very material presence in our schools, because in our schools now, teachers are expected to have an eye to, or should I say spy on children, so that they can report them to the state if they fear that they will become radicalized. It's called the prevent agenda. And the inspectorates of schools will go around, and one of the most important questions many of them will ask in Birmingham, which is considered to be a very dangerous hotbed of potential terrorists, because there are many, many, many Muslims and people of other colours and faith in our city, asking whether 4-year-olds are being radicalised. And if you think I'm making this up, there's another story, is that last week there was a child who was hauled up before the prevent officer in a school because he was referring to a cooker bomb. A cooker, you cook on bomb, as in an explosive. But what he was trying to say was cucumber. But he's 4. And he couldn't get it right. And this was on top of many other incidents that we've had reported in our last 6 months, including a case where a 10-year-old in Lancashire was actually interviewed by the police because he wrote that he lived in a terrorist house, when actually what he meant was a terrace house. But he spelt it wrong. And you'd have thought, well, why didn't the teacher just ask him? But you see, the teacher is also being watched, and their imagination is also being occupied by ideology. For me, this goes right to the heart of the problem of everything that we're discussing here, and David was introducing there. So I'm trying to be really concrete about these things. And I think it's at the heart of the challenge that Shi offered to us yesterday. He said, yeah, we can put it, see, part of the battle is to keep drama on the curriculum. I was part of those battles. I'm obviously, a bit young for most of them, but I was there for a long while. But if we are going to get drama on the curriculum, as Shi was saying, it's not just enough to get it on the curriculum, because he's saying getting it on the curriculum doesn't necessarily mean we're going to open up the gap for young people to become independent, critical thinkers and begin to think for themselves and fill that gap with meaning. Because the other pressure will also be there that we can still just use drama in the same kind of instrumental, ideologized way as any other form of education. And this is, for me, what's extremely important about this, because that challenge to find the gap is the difficulty that David has just been articulating and saying, actually, since the 70s, I've been kind of trying to do that, and it's really difficult. And it is really difficult. And I think what Bond offers us is an option or an opportunity to do that. But of course, I don't know how to do it. And I've been trying for the last 20 years. Before I just talk more specifically about some of his concepts, I just want to say a few words about the imagination, because I've been saying how imagination's been occupied and such things. But I want to just say that for me, what I mean by the imagination, certainly. And again, to go back to what Jolt said, that Kant wasn't talking about the imagination about it being something that's over there and disconnected from reality, because we are talking about imagining the real. And as was said, I think by Sochi yesterday, there are two forms of reality. And one is located in the external world and the other is located in the imaginary. But the imaginary is part of the external world because I imagine, I live in the world. I am nature thinking. And what I think is that we should recognize that the imagination shouldn't be seen or viewed as some kind of reverie or fantasy. It's a specific form of human consciousness. And it's therefore part of reality. You know, drama is the imagination in action. Drama animates the other, as David has said before, and it makes us socially engaged too. And when we're socially engaged, this makes it possible for us to take personal responsibility because we feel what we are experiencing in front of us on a stage, or if we are in a process drama. It is connected to us. The idea is connected there, and there. It's a felt understanding, and that means that the decisions we make are real decisions. And we take responsibility, and for me, that is the definition of politics in its absolute essence. It's not party political, it's not ideological. It is about taking responsibility for being who we are and who we want to be. So, for me, that's what drama can do. It can take us into the subjectivities of others, of other people, through fiction. I'm getting dry as well. It is dry up here, isn't it? Yeah. Sorry, can I? No, sorry. I'll put this on here as well. Oh, that's better. So, but the thing about imagination, never mind, is that David has said, and I'm quoting from something David wrote in 2005, that we can't be cold and detached because the self is engaged when we are imaginatively engaged, because by dramatizing something on a stage, we are actually dramatizing the self. We're not just watching others, we are meeting ourselves in a dramatic situation. But the danger of it, to quote Edward Bond in a personal letter to me, is, as he said, the imagination is either creative or destructive. There's no passive state in between. We need to imaginatively understand human problems so that they and we do not become destructive. We solve them only by being creative. This makes the imagination the basis of human education. The images, language, emotions, stories, records, they are the substance of the imagination. Without imagination, facts may still have meaning, consequences, but they cannot have value. And it is the imagination that gives us value. When facts can be abstracted and can be distorted and used in a very dangerous way. And believe me, I believe it to be absolutely true that the imagination will, as Shakespeare said, always come out. It will out. Which are what those atrocities that we've experienced in Europe in the recent weeks are about. It's about how the imagination has been captured, distorted, and the sense of injustice that people feel from living in an incredibly unequal and inhuman world is distorted, and then it comes out in the most destructive way that makes us less human, not more human. So our job within drama is to deal with that problem. And how do we deal with it? And I think that what we're struggling for in trying to find a new form, and also me trying to find my notes, is an approach, some tools that we can use through what we begin to call a Bondian approach to drama that we've been struggling with for a long time, many of us in this room, up here and down there too. I think it's Yeah, PowerPoint time, okay? So I've really, now this is going to impress you, it's about 10 slides. There we go. Well, you know, I'm a minimalist. Now, the other thing is I can't actually read it. That says site. Right. So I'm just going to take you through the tools a little bit, if I can. The site. When I say site, I mean something that is both physical. You know, like when you go to an archaeological site, it's a place where people dig and they reveal layers of the past. So it's a physical thing, but it's also a spiritual, an intellectual, and an emotional thing too. It's a multi-dimensional concept that Edward Bond has begun to articulate. So if you can imagine it in that way, I'm going to just try and illustrate its basic components. And then when you're working this afternoon, hopefully you can develop that. I'm also going to try and illustrate some things through the sharing of the play from last night. I know not everyone was here, but I'll try and contextualize that, so I'll try and be quite specific, okay? So I think slide 2. Right. So how we think about it very much at the moment is to think of it as 4 basic sites. Site A, Site B, Site C, and Site D, okay? Pretty straightforward. Now, the thing about it, of course, is the minute I separate them out, I'm in danger of becoming very rigid in my thinking. And the thing about the site as a concept is it's dialectically connected. So you can't have Site A without Site D. But it's like looking at an engine. It helps sometimes to take it to bits so that we can begin to see it in its constituent parts before we can see it in its whole. So Site A is best described, I think, as the social sites. Our epoch, society, culture, and institutions. And put simply, it's the world we live in and all those interconnectedness. But what I think Bond is saying, and I think what's utterly important, is that any drama that we create, any drama, and it doesn't matter if it's a Greek drama from 4,000 years ago, unless it resonates with our epoch today, has a very, very little value. Because otherwise that makes it a museum piece and not a piece of living drama that is an event in us. So that's why Medea is a play for today. Because actually Medea is speaking about all of the societal, epochal, cultural, and institutional crises that we experience as humans. So Site A always has to be present, which brings me to Site B. Specific sites, story, situations. So you see, these big ideas that I've just talked about as Site A, of course, they're the universals, but they're very, very inaccessible sometimes unless you can concretely root them in a reality that we can understand. Edward once said that the drama is the relationship between the kitchen table and the universe. And what he meant was that you can't get to the universe unless you can anchor yourself in the kitchen table, the familiarity of your surroundings that you can really, really understand, grasp, and enter into. So situations and stories are absolutely critical to that, because it's that situation that can take us to those big questions about what it is to be human. And often, I think what the best drama does, and what all Bond's drama does, is it takes us to an extreme. That's important. Why is it important? Well, if we take the story that we were sharing with you last night, it was set in the future in a detention centre in the UK, based on detention centres we already have, but more extreme. And in it, to really narrow it down, a woman, an illegal migrant, has been detained, and as they are taking the possessions away from the detainees, the security officers, the woman will not surrender this case. Now, I'll come back to that later. But the fact of the matter is that what we're beginning to do is locate ourselves in a very, very, very recognizable situation. A migrant clutching a suitcase is very resonant of Site A. By putting her in a fictional situation of a detention centre, we're beginning to find a story and a situation, but actually it's also something that you can understand because all of us have clung on to suitcases at different points in our life, haven't we? Sometimes when we're not even aware we're doing it. So there becomes a point of connection, which takes us to Site C. Site C is the central site. What the drama is really about. Yeah, Site C. Oh, it's B. You see, it's my first time, sorry. That's I just entered accident time, sorry. Yeah, that should be Site C, sorry, and damn, I should have got you to proof it this morning before I did it. Damn. Anyway, so Site C, the central site, what the drama is really about. And when I say what the drama is really about, I don't mean what it's telling you to think, because that's what I've made up in my head. I mean, what's really embraced in this story about the woman who will not let go of this suitcase. And that's revealed through the actions, images, and the objects and the texts. In a situation which is extreme, and the reason why it's extreme is because it's only often when we're in the extremity of any situation that ideology breaks free and we can see ourselves. We've all experienced it through grief, when suddenly it feels like the whole of the world has just fallen away. And that's because we're experiencing extremity of self in a situation, which is why it's which is why it's essential that we really push those situations to the absolute extreme of their logic, so that we can use actions, images, objects, and the text as well, to really begin to open up, what is this really about? And it doesn't mean what is it really about so you get the right answer, because the right answer does not work. It's so that you can begin to experience an event in you that you can then begin to determine what this is about in dialogue, in a dialectic relationship to the situation on the stage. Which takes us to Site D. Have I got that right? Yes, I got that one right. We use Site C in order to ensure that Site A, which is the world we are living in, and Site B, which is the specific situation, is accessed through the use of actions, images, objects, and text to Site D, which is the site of the participant as the imagination. You actively, the imagination in the drama, and what it means then and why. We meet ourselves on the stage because we have to make choices about what this situation means, and that is why we talk about opening the gap. Not closing it, not telling you what it is, but actually opening it up so that you can become part of the meaning of the whole. If we just move on to the next, I'm very pleased with this, I have to say. But I also have to admit, I didn't do it. Someone emailed it to me. But as you can see, that actually what I'm talking about is a spiral, whereby B is contained in A, is contained in C, is contained in D, But actually, if you turn it round the other way, D contains C, contains B, contains A, which is why there are two realities, because the imagination, the sight of the imagination is shaped by sight A, but we also live in a world where sight A is shaped by sight D, because people have ideas that they put into practice that change the world, that change history forever. And that is why we talk about imagining the real and why there are two forms of reality. Moving on to my next slide. Thank you. I want to say a little bit more about the center before I do, because the central site is the critical one. You see, because the way that it operates in any Bondian situation, and taking this yesterday, for example, is that it's not just what happens in the text, in the script as it was then, it's how it is enacted. And that is the critical thing. So, for example, it's not just that the woman clutches the suitcase, it's how she clutches the suitcase, because it's in how we do it that will open up the imaginative gap. Because there's ways that you can hold it symbolically, for example, that explains what the meaning of the suitcase is in the situation. But if as an actor you can begin to enter the situation and enact it rather than act it, which is about showing something that's already determined, but enter into it and allow yourself to experience the situation, experience the moment, then we have the capacity to open up the gap. So yesterday, the young people who shared with us yesterday, they were only at that beginning of how you might begin to open up that gap through how the woman will cling to that suitcase, how the security officer will then try to wrench it from her, and how, as happens in the script, what happens when the child falls out of it. And the center is always present. It's part of the site, and the drama expresses itself through the site. Everything comes through the center. If you can't find the center, it's no use. And what I mean by this is that the central problem of all drama, because we are dealing with what it is to be human, is justice. That the particular dramas, though, that we deal with, let's take this one yesterday, which has a story which looks at migration, but it's not about migration, it's about something else. And yesterday people will begin to say it's about control, or it's about what separates and connects us. It's about something much more complex. We don't know what it is yet because we didn't explore it. But it's through that particular story, the center in its particular situations, the play's main metaphors, all of its similes and metonyms are reflected in it. It's the patterns or the structures are extended from the center. If you just put the next one up, Adam. This is a quote from Bond himself. I should have, well, I don't know if it's fallen off, it should have been, anyway. He wrote this in 2000. He said, and he was talking about a play, but I would say it's the same for any story or any drama or any situation that we might devise together. He says, a play consists of one speech, which is repeated in increasingly searching ways. Each character takes the speech and reworks it. This speech is the central speech, what he calls the CS. It contains the basic theme of the play and also, in its utterance, the way the characters relate to the theme. At each occasion, a character will take the speech and then push it as far as he can in exploration of the theme. It will search for the truths of the play. So to use a famous example, you might say that Hamlet is just one speech, to be or not to be. In fact, that's the central line. But actually, you could say that all of those characters are reworking that same speech from their own perspective at any given point in the dramas, which is why Polonius says, he answers it, unto thine own self be true. That is what it means to be or not to be. But then Ophelia would say something else, etc., etc. What we've begun to discover in working through this, taking this idea, is that actually the center is a very radical thing if you're an actor, if you're asking people to enact rather than act, because you have to stop thinking about your character and you have to begin to think all the time, where is the center in what I am doing and saying? And that creates then a social orientation rather than individual actors thinking about their individual characters. And what we've begun to learn is that you can extend the center, not just into a speech. If we just move it on, Adam. We can extend a central speech, and we can find a central line, but then you begin to realize there are central images, actions, and objects, and even central sounds that constantly are coming through the fabric of the dramatic texts and situations we create. And I say central sounds, and I put here, this can also be human and prelingual, because what I mean by that is, central sounds yesterday was the phone buzzing. If we could have had the effect, the sound of the cards being put down on the table, the aeroplane going, which does something to our imagination. But they can also be prelingual. Those sounds that get behind the ideology of words, the scream of the woman in the detention room. Almost primeval, going back to the rawest sense of what it is to be human when you've entered the world. And she's screaming her pain of what? That's what we need to explore. So sound is very important as part of the site and part of the center too. So how am I doing for time? 5 minutes. Oh, right. No, that's okay. So I just want to move on to the next one. Because what we're trying to do, by locating ourselves in the site and expressing the center in every aspect of it, is create what we are now beginning to discuss and what David was describing earlier as a drama event. And what I'm saying is, it's an event in us, not just an event on the stage. And one of the most powerful forms of doing this is through, it's a Greek word, cathexis. And Bonds borrowed that from psychology. It's a Freudian term. Freud uses it. And it's where an object is invested with both objective and use values, but also a subjective investment that is greater than the thing itself. So the focus here is on the objects in the situation rather than the characters and of the ISOs, the security officers yesterday, and the migrants. It's through the objects in the drama, they're used in the situation story in order to create a gap for the participant to fill with meaning. So if I just try to describe this, and apologies for those of you who weren't there yesterday, but I still think you can grasp the notion of a woman, she's been on a journey, she's without a home, she's in a foreign land where the law has decreed she is illegal, has been told that she has to give up her one possession, a suitcase, and she won't let go. Now, we all recognize suitcases. It still has that value. We recognize it. It never changed all the way through the play. But the thing is, we didn't know what was in it. So when she was clinging on, it was opening up a gap wider and wider for our imagination to begin to invest ourselves in what is she clinging on to? What is she clinging on to? And then in the play, as it is described, that eventually there is a tussle between her and the senior immigration officer, who is traumatized by the fact that he cannot get home to see his child. His 4-year-old child that he's been waiting weeks and weeks for leave to go and meet, to give a book that he will read to her at bedtime and chocolate as a gift. That incredibly human thing that all parents can do. And yet, he's dealing with a woman that he doesn't see as a woman, he sees as an other. She has become objectified. She has become attached to another object, which is a suitcase which must be removed. And so this tussle goes on. And the woman starts to say, my baby, my baby. This woman who has been pacing up and down as if she's in a confined space, who has then urinated on the floor, will not eat, but will not give up that. She says, my baby, and he begins to say, no, my baby, my baby. And they begin to fight over what? A suitcase? Yes. But then, when the suitcase falls open, inside falls out the woman's dead baby. She has been carrying her dead child and she's not able to relinquish it. The suitcase is still a suitcase, but it has been cathected. It's now a coffin. It's now a womb. It's now, I don't know, resonances, but then that invites you to make those connections for yourself. So the meaning of the suitcase is transformed in the situation, in an extreme situation, and the hope is, if we could enact it as it needs to be enacted, we break the hold of ideology and we begin to see what the real situation is and what the real meaning of the situation is created there and then, and the center is revealed. And that doesn't have a right or a wrong answer, because it's both objective and subjective, and it involves us, and we all have to take responsibility for what is revealed on the stage. And what are we going to do for it? And what we would have to ask ourselves, what would I do in that situation? Not necessarily the woman, but the man who wants to go home and see his baby. He suddenly becomes a flawed human being rather than just a uniform. She suddenly becomes a grieving mother that I can connect to rather than a woman wearing a hijab. It fractures that reality in a way that ideology can no longer own it, and our imagination is liberated to step into that gap and begin to try and make meaning of it. That is what the potential is, I hope, in that situation to be revealed for us. And then it is developed, because the final scene of the play is that the other immigration security officer, who has been obsessed by food, but you have to ask yourself, what is he really hungering for? Finally sits on the other side of the two-way mirror and stares into an empty room, which is now empty of all that has gone before. But imaginatively, for you, the chairs are still there. And imaginatively, the people that were there before are still there, including that suitcase and that dead child. And he's sitting there and he's eating chocolate. And it is a chocolate bar. But then you also wonder, it's almost as if he's eating the other security officer's child. It's almost as if he is going back to an infantile state himself. And so childhood, birth, death is still held within the objects, in the site, and in the situation. I don't know if that makes sense, but what all the way through both that situation, that extreme story, what we're trying to work with in creating that drama is the use of the story and the situation to take us to an extreme logic of a situation where ideology is broken, and by locating us in our site A, which is the site of the culture and the world that we are all in today, through this specific situation, the center is revealing all the problems of what it is to be human, and we have to make choices because we can see ourselves, not just the other. And that can be a very creative thing. So I know I've got to finish, and I hope I haven't gone over. But what we're offering really is that the site and the centre and drama event and these tools are the beginnings of a way of trying to find a way, and we are groping in the dark towards new forms that can express what it is to be human in our particular context. And hopefully this afternoon in our workshops, we can just try and use those concepts a little bit further to explore them a bit more, and then begin to see how we can use them to help us plan our work that we're going to do, whether it's with children, whether it's with adolescents, or any other community that's out there. Thank you.